The following terms are from the glossary of the Android developers website. You will hear them over and over again when you're developing Android applications, so it's important to know what they mean. A .apk file is an Android application package file. Every Android application is packaged in one of these files. A .apk file contains the application's bytecode in the form of .dex files, as well as resources and assets that the application depends upon. The application package file can have any name, but it must have an APK extension. A .dex file is a file that contains bytecode for the Android application. In normal applications, that is, applications that run on computers like desktops and laptops, once Java sources have been compiled into bytecode, they are archived into a jar file. In Android applications, the bytecode is further reduced to Dalvik VM instructions and then combined into a DEX file. DEX stands for Dalvik Executable because older Android devices use the Dalvik virtual machine. Newer Android devices use the Android runtime, but the DEX format is still used by the Android runtime. An action is something that an intent sender wants done. An intent is a special message that can be sent from one activity to another. When an intent is sent, the kind of application that the sender wants is specified in the message. For example, the sender might want a view from the receiver, or a sender might want the receiver to shake the phone. Actions are string values that can be built in or defined by the developer. Activities are at the heart of an Android application. They are associated with a single screen, and they respond to user interactions with the device while that screen is active. Activities are the controllers in the model view controller pattern for Android applications. All activity classes in an application are derived from the activity superclass. An application needs at least one activity to work, but it can have many activities. An Android application almost always has one or more activities. If an Android application has a screen, it must have an activity. Certain applications may just run a service, but these are not the norm. An application is packaged in a single application package that includes bytecode, resources, assets, and the manifest file, Android manifest.xml. A fragment can be thought of as a sub-activity. It represents a behavior or a portion of the user interface in an activity. A fragment can be thought of as a modular section of an activity with its own life cycle and input events. You can add or remove a fragment from an activity while the activity is still running. Fragments were introduced into Android so that developers could create more dynamic and flexible screens on devices that had larger screens, like tablets. An intent is a message that can be passed between activities. The message is asynchronous, so the Android system does not need to wait for a response. An intent is not sent directly to another application or activity. It is sent to the Android system. The system decides whether the message should be forwarded to the receiving activity. The intent object is always an instance of the class intent. A layout resource is an XML file that describes the layout of an activity screen. For example, an activity object of type main_activity will have a layout resource named activity_main.xml. Android has various kinds of layouts. Two of the most popular are relative layout and linear layout. As of 2017, constraint layout is the newest type of layout. Every Android application has a manifest file named Android-Manifest.xml that provides information about the application package, like the name and the versions of Android it should work with. It also tells what components the application uses and what libraries it needs. A resource is an application component that is external to the compiled code. Pictures and sounds are good examples of resources. Every Android project has a res directory that holds XML files for all the resources it uses. The XML file is a reference for the resource. It indicates what type of resource it is and where it is located. A service is an object of class service that runs in the background. Therefore, a service does not have a screen associated with it. Examples of services are playing music or monitoring network activity. A view object derives from the class view. A typical view object can be a GUI component like a button, a label, or an input area for text. When a view object is a GUI component, it is often associated with an event, like pressing a button or entering text. However, layout objects also inherit from the view class. And that concludes this brief introduction to Android terminology. Before we go, here are a few questions for you to go back and try to answer. First, which of the terms that we just discussed corresponds directly to a Java class in Android development? For example, the term view corresponds to a Java class called View in the Android API. What are the other terms that correspond to classes? Next, which of the terms are associated with a particular component of the model view controller pattern? And finally, what terms are associated with specific files or folder in the folder structure of a typical Android project? Don't just think about these questions, make sure you can answer all of them. It will help you get a better understanding of how everything we talked about in this presentation works together. And that's it for this brief introduction to Android development. We've learned a little bit about the Android system, what a typical Android project looks like, the model view controller architecture, and some Android terminology. Thanks for watching.